Okay, so far we've taken a look at some of the sensory regions, the visual region, sensation, touch, and hearing, and we've mapped it out to the sensory organs, so we see a flow of information coming from the sensory organs into the brain. Now let's build on top of that, and let's add the language areas of the brain and see how they are involved in processing information. So what you're seeing here, this pathway 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is the flow of information that's happening when we are speaking a written word. So we're going to be reading something and then just speaking it aloud. Well, not surprisingly, the process in the cortex begins with the visual system, right? So our eyes out here would be detecting light from the world, from the page, right? Electrical signals racing back to the thalamus and then on to the visual cortex. And so in region 1 here, this part of the brain is going to be analyzing just the lines on the page, right? So some basic visual analysis. Now, cells in this region are going to send their results to other regions, the recognition region of the visual system down here. So in region 2 here, these cells are going to be able to identify that certain arrangements of lines are actually words. So it seems that we have stored in this region of the brain word forms, the visual forms of words, so we can recognize certain scribbles as words. So here the visual system is simply analyzing the lines, how long are they, their arrangement, their orientation, etc. And down here the brain is now pulling out more information that some of these arrangements are actually words that we're familiar with, right? So we've recognized them as words. Well, now this brain region is going to send information. And again, these arrows would mean axons or carrying electrical signals, right? So region 2 is going to send that information about word form, visual word form, to region 3. And here is where researchers believe we sort of have stored the sounds of different words that we're familiar with, right? So we got the visual form of a word. Here we have what a word sounds like. Each word has a characteristic sound. So the word cat, right, has an acoustic quality to it, different from dog. So here we have a representation, a stored memory of the sounds of words. Once this brain region here recognizes the sound of the word, then that information can be sent up here to the front part of the brain, the speech areas here. And in this area, region 4, we seem to have the motor plans, the programming for how to say a particular word, right? So the sound of a word has to be generated by our vocal system. So region 4 seems to have representations of how to say words. That information will be sent to the movement system that controls our voluntary muscles. There's a part of that strip of tissue there controls the mouth and the larynx and the tongue, all the vocal organs, right? So this would be the actual control system for operating our vocal organs. Remember, this would be sort of the plan for how to say a word. This would be the actual final stage of saying the word. So let's recap then. To speak a written word here, we have the visual system is analyzing the lines on the page. Region 2 here is going to recognize the visual forms of word. Region 3 is going to access the sound of the word. Region 4 is going to make a plan to say the word. Region 5 is going to actually engage the vocal organs to say it. And again, a flow of information. And we saw on another slide that this can be happening very quickly, right? Now, what about if you are speaking a heard word? Well, here the process simply begins with the hearing section. So we're going to hear sounds, and then this region here is going to detect that certain sounds are actually the sounds of words. And from this region, again, we go to the planning to say, and then we're going to engage the control systems, and we speak the heard word. Notice let me see, let me get out of this. Notice then the flow of information for speaking a written word or for hearing a word here. It means that if you have damage to different parts of this system, you will have different symptoms. And so this has been part of how researchers have mapped out the flow of information in the language systems, is to study people who have damage to different parts of the brain. Why would they have damage? Strokes, for example, or other kinds of brain injury. So for example, if somebody had damage to region 2 here, see, now they would not be blind, right, because the visual system is intact, but what they would be unable to do is to recognize words on the page. So they'll see lines and things, but they won't be able to recognize the words. Yet they'll still be able to hear language and repeat what they hear and produce their own language. They'll be able to comprehend spoken language because this system is intact. Area 3 is intact and the hearing system is intact. They just won't be able to recognize word forms on the page. On the other hand, if you had damage to region 3, you see, you won't have access to the sounds of words and so on. Well, then you're not going to be able to read, right? You're not going to be able to understand the written word, nor will you be able to understand the spoken word, right? So you're going to have language comprehension problems. On the other, however, you might have language comprehension problems, but you'll still be able to produce your own speech, right? What about damage to region 4 here? Then that would be associated with a speech production problem, but comprehension may be intact. So they can understand what you're saying. They can respond to a command or something, or a question. They can read something and respond to it, but they wouldn't be able to produce speech fluently. If you had damage over here, you're talking about paralysis of the vocal organs, for example. And again, if you had damage to region 1, the person would report blindness. Now, they might be blind, but their language comprehension is still intact through the auditory channels. Finally, in this diagram, I wanted to share with you what we call inner speech. So the top diagram here shows two people in conversation. And if you look carefully inside their head, they have the little brain regions here. So this would be A, would be the auditory region. That's the hearing system. This other little green one they labeled W for Wernicke's area. That's the language comprehension system back here. The B area up in the front, that's the speech production. It's called Broca's area, named after some people who discovered these things. And then the M would be the motor system, right, that runs your vocal apparatus. So these two people are having a conversation. So when this one speaks, it's picked up by auditory cortex, sent over to the language comprehension area, off to the speech production area, to the motor system, and they respond. And the same thing's going on in the head of this one. Well, what if we just eliminate this person and have the person speak to themselves? So they're just talking to themselves. When they speak, the auditory system picks it up and sent to the speech comprehension, over to speech production, and so on. And they are now just talking to themselves. But what if we eliminate the motor component of actually speaking, right? So we just quiet down the vocal organs. We just don't articulate it. Well, what you have in the final one down here is this looped activity between the comprehension system and the speech production system without the motor activity, right? And in fact, there may be some auditory cortex active as well. This person is not speaking, but they're thinking, right? They have an inner voice going on. So this we call inner speech. So inner speech, when you are sort of having a thought in your mind that has a grammatical structure to it, right? And when you're having a thought, when you're sort of talking to yourself in your mind, it is using the same sort of speech systems as when you're actually engaged in a real conversation. So we call that inner speech. What's missing here, of course, is the motor component. So there's no output. There's no actual speaking going on here. It is what we might say thinking. But it is thinking in the form of words. And that's going to be in contrast to thinking in the form of images. And so when we have an image in our head, we also use the visual system in our brain. So the visual system can be turned on, right, activated by things we see in the world, but also can be activated by other parts of the brain, especially the frontal lobes, can turn on the visual system so as to create visual images. So just to recap then, we've been dealing with language in this lesson here. This flow of information here looks like it's one directional, but we now have to modify that. This idea that these regions communicate in a reciprocal way. So the comprehension systems send information to speech, but speech back to here. And so you can get loops of activity in the language system, and that's how we accounted for this idea of inner speech. And we'll see that loops of brain activity occur in many other examples of our mental life as well.